I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I believe that all leadership is self-leadership, or at least 99% of all leadership is self-leadership. So one of my mottos is lead yourself first. And by the way, I hope it's okay if I don't share screen and show you a bunch of fancy slides. I'm going to do it the old analog way. And towards the end of my presentation, I will actually give you a link in the chat where you can find all of these things and everything that I mentioned. So here's why. I've been a leadership and organization applied scientist for over 30 years. And I no longer believe that leadership is a main thing. I don't think that leadership is behaviors. I don't think that it's personality. I don't think it's characteristics. Of course, none of us believe, or most of us believe it's not position. But what I believe it is I believe it's a side effect of being in pursuit towards something that's bigger than me, and I require help. And lo and behold, therefore, leadership is so related to taking ownership or responsibility for something. So I'm going to introduce you, if you haven't been, to the responsibility process and how to apply the responsibility process. Many scholars, teachers use this model of the mind that says that we have an upper mind and a lower mind. It's not the only model of the mind, but it's one that's widely used as a kind of an analog to what's going on in our mind. And the idea here is that the upper mind and the lower mind are driven by different things. And, the upper mind and the lower mind go by different names first. The upper mind goes by the name of resource mind, or the creative mind, or the growth mind. And the lower mind is often known as the ego mind, the defensive mind, or the resistant mind. So I'm guessing that you've been exposed to these ideas over and over and over, and you don't have difficulty following me along here. So here's the really fascinating thing, and that is that the drivers in the upper mind and in the lower mind are extremely different. All right, let's start in the lower mind. In the lower mind, we're driven by our ego needs for approval, for feeling safe. In other words, our ego is always protecting itself. So this isn't physical safety. This is safety of holding on to what we think or believe to be so and not having it be challenged. And control. So the ego is actually always, the ego part of our mind is always thinking that it has to absolutely create the next second of your life for you, or it's going to die. So that's the lower mind. In the upper mind, we're driven by our unique expression of self. We're driven by our unique genius, by our unique inspiration, by our unique mix of skills and experiences and tools. And so you could say that ultimately in the upper mind, we're driven by what we really, really, really want. And I don't mean that in a narcissistic sense. I mean it in an existential sense, or self-expression. Right? Who do we want to be? What do we want to be doing? What do we want to be experiencing in our life? The issue is that most societies in the world, focus much more on controlling us in ways that reinforce our lower mind. And they don't spend nearly as much time developing us and our uniquenesses and helping us identify our own true inspirations and our true geniuses and identifying what we truly want. So Stephen Covey said, and this is often misattributed to Viktor Frankl, and Stephen Covey was paraphrasing Viktor Frankl and some other smart psychologists or psychiatrists when he said it. He said, in between stimulus and response is a space. In between stimulus and response is a space. Right? In between stimulus and response is a space. Right? And in that space is choice. And in that choice is our freedom and our power to grow. Now, I could go on and on and on about that, about how much negative programming we build up over our life, where we just go into a reactive mode. So we have a stimulus, and then in space, instead of space, we simply react, right, from autopilot programs that we've put in place. Right? I hate that kind of food. I'll never date that kind of person. All supervisors must be avoided, never talk back to one. Lots and lots and lots of stuff. We label these things as good, bad, right, wrong, and then we use those shortcuts of good, bad, right, wrong to stay in control. So what the responsibility process does for us is it allows us to see how we are reacting when stimulated by something. And the practice of responsibility thinking for self-leadership allows us to start to pry a little bit of space in between stimulus and response. So let me introduce you to the responsibility process. If you haven't been introduced to it before, I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time here. I've published a bunch on this. There's content all over the place around the responsibility process. It's kind of my sparkly thing that people love to talk about. And in the end, it's just a signal device in your mind that helps you make some choices after you've been stimulated by something. So the responsibility process is a pattern in your mind, my mind, and the mind of everybody we know. And the pattern gets triggered every time something goes wrong. And a definition of something going wrong would be an internal conflict in the mind between what you want and what you have, right? So two opposing thoughts between what you want and what you have at that moment, right? So let's say that you want to enjoy a nice cup of tea, and as you're headed back to the table, wherever you're going to enjoy it, your elbow bumps against something and the tea is all over the front of you and down the floor. You can imagine at that moment you're a little upset. We call that angst, right? Angst is a technical psychological term about what happens when we get upset, or you're frustrated, or you're embarrassed, or whatever. And at that moment, what you want was to enjoy a nice cup of tea, and what you have is a mess. Every time something goes wrong in our life, big or small, whether it's lost car keys or a lost retirement account, and we discover it, then our mind, this process gets triggered because our mind goes into a hyperactive search for cause and effect. Why is this happening to me? So responsibility is about cause and effect. And these are about our perceptions of cause and effect. And we enter this chart at the bottom, we enter it at blame. So we think this has to do with computational effort. So the easiest thing to do when something goes wrong is to look around and say, who put that there? Or who bumped my elbow? Or who moved my keys? Right? And it's a mental state with its own cause-effect logic. Over the years, you've learned so much about this idea. You know that it's a powerless state. You know that you're a victim in this state. You know that somebody else has to change for you to be happy. So then why do we do it, right? If it seems so, silly, stupid. Well, we do it because the ego mind gets lots of payoff from it. It gets to be a victim. It gets to be self-righteous. It gets to tell somebody else that they're wrong or bad. So there's a tremendous payoff in these mental states for the ego. And that's why it can take some training, some retraining or reconditioning of yourself if you want to change it. So we can stay in blame for a moment or an hour or a week or a year or a lifetime, or we can get off of it because it's just a mental state. And if we get off of it, we graduate state by state upwards. So we graduate to justify. Justify is very similar logic to blame, and that is that you're in the position of effect and the cause is outside of you. Except in blame, the cause is an entity, a person, a team, a department, an organization, a political party, whatever. In justify, the the thing that's at cause is a set of circumstances, right? And circumstances are always beyond our control, aren't they? Right? So it's the weather, it's the economy, it's the process, it's the budget, it's we don't have enough resources, it's the culture, right? It's something that we say when we have angst about not being able to have something or accomplish something or do something. If we land in justify, we actually feel justified in having this problem if we can pin it on something. And one of the things that Agile taught me years and years and years and years and years ago is the saying, I didn't have time, is a justify, right? We know the truth is, I didn't prioritize that. So justify is a pernicious coping state, and we're all really, really good at it because we're taught to be smart, and we're taught to be really good with reasoning. And the people who are the best at justify are people with engineering kind of backgrounds, because they're taught to explain things, right? So lots of times I was just explaining actually sounds like a justify coming from I have upset or anxiety about not being able to do or have something that I want. Again, something outside of us has to change for us to be happy. So from a position of taking 100% responsibility for my life, I'm wasting my time in justify, even if it feels good to my ego to be there, because I'm not very good at changing circumstances. And for the last year and a half, the number one justify on the planet has been COVID. Right? I can't have what I want, or I can't be happy until COVID goes away and we, quote, return to normal. And I've been helping a lot of people get past COVID as a justify. And if you had serious issues during this pandemic, family problems, illness, death, loss, I absolutely have nothing but compassion for you. I am not trying to downplay any of that. All I'm trying to say is that when we operate from this mental state, we're actually saying that we have no interest anymore. We're powerless to do anything about it. We're relying on somebody else or something else changing so that we can be happy. So it's never a place of power. If we graduate from justify, then that little sorting mechanism in our mind seems to switch from external cause to internal cause, and we lay blame on self. So shame, guilt, experiences guilt, is just lay blame on self. And this is where we say, I'm the dummy, I'm the dolt, I did this, gosh, why am I so stupid? Will I never learn? Right? And it's in a different color because this is where society taught us something different. So our research agrees with society that blaming and justifying does no good. Now, a place where we differ with society is society says that you have permission to tell people who are blaming or justifying that they're stupid or arrogant or ignorant. Our research says, no, they're hurting. They're human and they're hurting. And I would only make it worse by pointing out to them or calling them ignorant or stupid. So our research brings much more humanity than the typical view of blame and justify. In shame, though, most societies use shame to control us. And they actually say if we're beating ourselves up for having a problem or mistake, that we're taking responsibility. Oh, good boy, he's taking responsibility. And we say that's not, because in the mental state of responsibility, we actually feel very strong. We feel high self-agency. We feel, I call it the mental state of freedom, power, and choice. And it's a mental state where we're actually completely owning our situation, even if we don't have a solution for it. We are taking charge of our life, and we're taking charge of that problem space. In shame, our assumption is there's something wrong with us, right? We even learned to say, what's wrong with me, right? So we're not powerful when we're in this shame or guilt state yet. Although we can get into activity because we feel more angst and shame, and we have learned through our lives that getting into action alleviates some of that angst. So, people say, oh, I went for a run to blow off steam, or things like that. So we shame our children and we shame each other and shame people at work in hopes that they will get active doing something. The question is, how resourceful is what they're doing? And if we decide to not agree with the thought in our head that there's something wrong with us, then we graduate to obligation. And obligation is the mental state of have to, don't want to. Have to, don't want to. And this is also a pseudo responsibility. A lot of people think, what's wrong with obligation? At least they're getting the job done, they're showing up. And the issue with obligation is still it's a mental state that is a coping with a problem. And your motivation in the mental state of obligation is to simply survive the trap, survive the burden. So, excuse me, in obligation, you feel trapped in a promise or a commitment or a relationship that you no longer want to keep. And so we're not actually motivated to do our best at it. We're motivated to do just enough to get through or get by. And also in obligation, we build up resentment. And that takes a lot of mental clicks and emotional clicks to deal with that. So finally, if we refuse to operate out of obligation, which is one of my best tools, is I refuse to blame, I refuse to justify, I refuse to shame myself for having a problem or mistake, and I refuse to operate out of obligation. Then when you do that, your mind actually starts breaking through, if you can envision this, to a mental state called responsibility. And responsibility is here. Right? Responsibility is the space between stimulus and response. That if you can actually do what I just said, which is if you can retrain yourself to catch yourself blaming and stop, catch yourself justifying and stop, catch yourself beating yourself up and stop, catch yourself feeling trapped or burdened and stop, then it seems that we have access to another gear in our mind, this mental state of responsibility, in which we have much better stochastic or probabilistic reasoning available to us. And it's like there's an aspect of mind, universal mind, whatever mind you want to call it. It's like there's an aspect of mind that comes in and helps us here figure it out. So, homework for you. Next time you catch yourself saying something like, I have to go to that stupid meeting, catch yourself saying have to, and replace it with anything that implies volition. Right? So, I am going to this stupid meeting because I don't want the consequences of not going, and I haven't figured out how to change it. Right? Now, think about the difference between I have to go to this thing and I am going to this thing I don't like and I'm working on changing it. The difference is in that aspect of your mind that supports you there. So if you claim I have to, then your mind says, yep, you're screwed. And if your mind if you say I am going because I haven't figured out how to change it yet, your mind says, oh, you want me to help you? Sure, I'll start working on that. Right? So that's the responsibility process. And the reason it's so important in life is because with blame and justify, we get no results. All right? Think about the last time you were involved in some problem solving or conflict meetings that went on for days or weeks, and you met with a bunch of other people and you burned dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of a company's money, and it never got past finger pointing in those meetings, right? You can calculate the cost of hanging out in a blame and justify environment because no results are going to ever accrue from that. In shame and obligation, we get unsatisfying results. We do get into action and we do produce things. You've all seen organizations or teams that operate primarily out of shame or obligation. And so you see that they're producing unsatisfying results. And it's only in responsibility that we produce results that matter. And by results that matter, I mean the product itself, right, the solution, as well as the people, and you, and your joy and satisfaction, because you're operating from the part of your mind that's fully expressing, being more authentic. So, just going to close out here quickly and then move to some questions. So, I like to say that above the line, and this line between obligation and responsibility, above the line we grow, below the line we cope. And coping is a billion-dollar industry. There's, I don't know, last time I looked, 40,000 titles on Amazon about coping, how to cope with a bad boss and all that kind of stuff. Coping is a huge market, and you're taught that you should develop coping skills. I believe coping is overrated. Right? I would much rather grow than cope. And coping means that you're accumulating lots and lots and lots of anxiety, stressors, and then you're trying to juggle them. Right? So I see lots and lots of people who are smart and caring and ambitious, and they're suffering in a life that they don't know how they got there, and they don't know how to change it. And mostly what I can do for them is to teach them to stop coping and start growing. So if you're into the language of lean, which is in the title of your group, right, above the line is value, below the line is waste, wasted thought, wasted action. And while this is a signal device, there's nothing you can do about this. I still have a responsibility process in my mind. It still gets triggered every day. I've been practicing this for 30 years. So a lot of people learn about this and they think the game is that somehow you scratch out blame and justify and shame and obligation and you get to responsibility and stay there for the rest of your life. Every time something goes wrong, your mind goes to the bottom and you get to climb up again. So the keys to responsibility and to self-leadership are developing your conscious powers of intention, awareness, and confront. So intention, awareness, and confront are each powers of your mind that you were born with. You can develop them like a muscle. Society didn't do it for you. Society was busy developing your intellect and shaping you morally to be a good, responsible member of society. And the place where you develop these powers of your consciousness are in personal growth programs and spiritual growth programs and leadership development programs. So awareness is the number one tool in leadership development worldwide for, I don't know, at least the last 3 or 4 decades. I want to point out a LinkedIn article here. There's a lot of people who equate agility and responsibility, and some people think that responsibility is the very essence of agility, because responsibility is the ability to face change and to take ownership of it and do something about it. So I wrote an article for LinkedIn a while back about agility and responsibility. And the main things that I call out in there are the ability to respond to change, which is so important in agility, and the self-organizing power of responsibility. Think about it. When a team gets this language of responsibility into their team or into the organization, they have a core organizing principle, a shared language around upsets and problem solving and problem ownership that no other, that there's no other language for that than this language that I know of that's so powerful, because it is so natural. It's absolutely organic. And I even use the little iterative design in the banner of that article. But more than anything, as I mentioned earlier, what practicing responsibility has done for me and so many others is it's brought humanity to the front, right? I now have so much compassion when I see other people who are demonstrating these coping mechanisms. I know that there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're just stuck in a mental state that they don't know about or don't know how to change. And so with that, I would love for you to ask me any questions. By the way, on that doc that was shared, I invite you to download this poster of the responsibility process. It has the definition of each mental state, and it has a summary on the back that you could actually pass out to your team and read it together and talk about what that might mean.